Hi, today we are in Redwood City in the Highfive office. Hi Sean, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, Martin. Thank you very much for coming by. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Shan Sinha. I'm the founder and CEO of Highfive. We build an all-in-one hardware, software, video, and web conferencing tool for businesses of any size. And we're based here in Redwood City.
Cool. When did you start this company and what made you come up with this business idea?
So we started the company about just over 3 years ago. I've been in the world of communication and collaboration for a pretty long time now, going on 12, 13 years. Starting at Microsoft, where I worked on a couple of products there, left Microsoft, started a company in the collaboration space that got bought by Google. At Google, I was running Google Enterprise Apps, where we were bringing cloud-based email to companies. And so where the idea for Highfive, it was a long way of getting to the idea for Highfive, but where the idea for Highfive came from was a bunch of things that we saw at Google. Google is a pretty phenomenal place. They communicate differently than every other company in the world. And what we ended up seeing at Google was a company that decided to use video as their primary way to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. Most companies still use conference calls and the telephone to talk to each other, but at Google we use video. Mm-hmm. And all of that technology that enabled that was made through a bunch of homegrown systems that we had created there. And when we saw that, we said we were convinced that every other company in the world would communicate the way we did at Google. And so we decided to start Highfive based on that insight. And that's what led to what we're doing now 3 years later.
Can you walk us briefly through the beginnings of Highfive? So once you've left Google, what were the first 2 or 3 months look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. The first few months, when we stumbled onto our observation that there was a really big opportunity here, there were a bunch of questions that we asked. I mean, the first question we asked was, well, what was it that made video really work in that environment in the way that we saw at Google? And the numbers were pretty staggering. Google was 40,000 people. And the question that we asked was, well, what made video work across all those 40,000 people? Just to put it in perspective, at Google, we were doing 20,000 video calls every single day. Wow. The average person was using video 1 to 2 times a day. And so the first couple of months was really spent figuring out what that key insight was, how we were going to structure our product, what was going to be important to our product, and what was not going to be important, almost as critical. And so the first 2 to 3 months, we spent time securing some initial investment. Mm-hmm. We put some definition around what product we were going to build, and recruiting an initial team. And so when we ultimately left Google, the first 2 to 3 months was going from 2 people, my co-founder and myself, to around 8 people just within the first couple of months. We secured some initial funding from some great investors here, and we really just focused on product definition. And the thing that's really interesting, and I think maybe for everyone who's listening to us right now, the thing that was really interesting was we had this insight for a product, and we put together our initial plans within those first 2 to 3 months. 3 years later, we're working on substantively the same exact problem. And so after 3 years now, what's amazing to see is that those ideas that we were working on in a small room together have now led to a company that's now 70 people. We've got over 1,000 customers now. And we're essentially working on the same idea that was a genesis for the company. And so we haven't had to have any major pivots or anything like that. But the first few months were really critical for laying the foundation for what we were ultimately going to create.
Sean, how hard was it to raise the money?
It's a good question. So I was fortunate where a couple of prior successes and being associated with Microsoft and Google ended up being a significant asset in raising capital. So for us, raising some of that initial capital was not terribly challenging. A lot of that was our history and the work that we've done in the past. The second part of it was this was a really big market. Business communication is one of these $8 billion markets now, and a lot of the products are very, very old and outdated and antiquated, and so I think there was a lot of interest in bringing new products to life, creating new companies in the category. So it ended up not being too much of a challenge to raise some initial capital. But what I would say is, as you continue to need more capital down the line, raising money is always challenging, and we ended up, we've ended up having our share of learnings as we've been going through that process as well.
Cool. Let's talk about the business model of Highfive. Shan, what are the typical customer segments that you are targeting?
So Highfive's business model is very simple. We build an all-in-one video conferencing and web conferencing device for businesses that they can use to deploy video all across their company. We're all familiar with the types of problems we deal with at work. You walk into a room trying to get together with a group of people, trying to get work done, and inevitably in every single company, someone says, why are we burning the first 15 minutes just trying to get people connected? People are trying to plug cables in, they're trying to get their screen on the TV, they're trying to get somebody dialed in. And it turns out the first 15 minutes of every meeting generally end up in a mess. And the reason why is we're increasingly distributed. People are remote, we have multiple offices, and everybody's trying to get work done. And the tools that we have available to do that were all designed for a very different world. So Highfive simplifies all that. Highfive gives companies a way to bring easy, simple, and affordable video to everyone in their organization. Conference rooms, mobile devices, laptops, and other desktop computers. The way Highfive works is very simple. We have a simple hardware device. So this is it right here, that we build. You attach it to a TV. It's kind of like plugging in an Apple TV-like device that you might use at home. We have a cloud service that people sign up for, and it ultimately takes just a couple of minutes to set up. We target today small to mid-market businesses, so people companies between 50 and 1,000 people. We make it very easy to try, buy, and use. We sell the device for an initial one-time upfront fee, and then we have a service plan available for companies to subscribe to, and we've got a couple of different service plan packages that companies can use depending on what features that they need.
And how are you different from other web conferencing companies or Skype or something else? So other solutions that I can use to solve this problem of having like a remote communication via video?
It's a good question. There are a lot of options that people have. The interesting thing that we've observed is that regardless of all the options that people have, inevitably the thing that people keep coming back to is the beginning of every meeting still tends to take 15 minutes to get going for some reason, because not all of it works. The big differentiator that we have stems from an observation that we made back at Google that led to the formation of Highfive. Most of the tools out there, like the ones you're referring to, Skype and Google Hangouts and all of that, were designed to support people working at their laptops or their desktops. Skype specifically was really designed for grandparents to talk to their grandchildren in our personal lives, but they weren't really designed for the needs of us at work. At work, our requirements are a little more unique. So when you think about people at work, what ends up happening is you have groups of people that are in the office, you've got groups of people that are remote, and those groups of people in the office tend to go into a conference room to work together, and the people that are remote, that might be working from home or in a different geography, need to connect to those groups of people in the conference room. So the thing that makes Highfive unique is that we bring together a in-conference room experience with an experience, with a user experience for people that are outside of that conference room, so that everybody can very easily get connected together. So the big difference is we bring together the physical in-room experience with the people that are mobile or working from remote locations. No other product does that effectively, affordably, or as easily as we do. We put everything together in a great user experience and make it easy to use. And so that's ultimately what makes us different. At the large end, there are lots of traditional incumbent companies like Cisco and Polycom working here, but all of their products are antiquated, they're outdated, they're massively expensive, and they're just unapproachable for most companies that are just trying to get work done.
And how does it normally work for a small company that is buying your product? Are they only buying this for one office, or are they buying this for the whole company, for connecting international office?
So the way the pattern that we've seen over the course of the last year. So we started shipping our product in January. So we've only been in market for 9 months now. One of the interesting things for us was that, you know, we spent 2.5 years really building a product that made sense for businesses. But what we've seen, the pattern that we've seen, is typically a company will say, let me bring Highfive in for a team of people, and what we'll do is we'll outfit a couple of offices where that team is distributed. And then as that tends to work, what will end up happening is they'll tend to roll out Highfive more broadly across their organization. And the thing that we've been really most excited about is that companies have been responding very, very favorably to the overall user experience. They're giving us high marks for the ease of use and simplicity. People are able to join calls without having to go through all of the complexity that people run into. We've got over 1,000 customers now. We're processing nearly 1 million minutes a week of calls, and we've got our largest customers are deploying hundreds and even thousands of users now within their organizations.
What have been the major challenges for you? Really understanding the problem, or finding a good user experience, or was it more a technology point of view?
There's been a bunch of challenges that we've had to solve along the way, and I think we're probably still at the earlier phases of working through all those challenges. We're just starting to kind of go through our growth and scale phase right now. But the biggest challenges that we've had to solve kind of stem from a few things. One is we've had to solve the problem of bringing something that's really hard to build, really hard technology, and bringing that into an end user experience that's easy to use. The thing that's really unique about our particular product is that the category, it feels like something that should just be easy. I want to do a call with a group of people. I just want it to work. It turns out, just in that call, what you're actually trying to do is maybe 15 different things, and all of those different use cases have to be woven together into an easy-to-use experience. So that's been one big problem we've had to solve. Second big problem is that the technology infrastructure has to work. It has to always be reliable. It has to be something that is rock solid. And in order to do that, there's a lot of engineering required to make all this work well over the public internet. The third problem is more of a user behavior problem we've had to solve. So what's unique about Highfive is that we're asking people to work in a different way, and figuring out how you evangelize that new way of working. You should use video when you've typically been used to using conference calls. How do you encourage and drive that user behavior change is a whole set of problems that we've begun to get good at, but continue to have more work to do there. And so when we think about what makes Highfive a really hard business to build, it boils down to hard technology that's got to be easy to use, and you got to drive user behavior change. But the good news is when you get all that right, you actually enable a brand new change inside companies, and you enable a brand new change in the way that people work. And that's the part that's most exciting, whenever you see businesses fundamentally working differently than they did before.
Sean, when you look at the communication network, once you build it for a small company, is it only closed? So that means that from Office A of the same company, I can only call Office B if it has the same hardware from you installed? Or is it also that I can combine and dial in with my Skype account and some other people are using your hardware and software?
It's a good question. We are built on open standards. So we built our product on top of a standard called WebRTC. The great news about WebRTC is it's a new standard that's being built into platforms all around the world, into all different products. And so while the way that we approach the ability for people to talk to each other, regardless of whether they have our systems, is to take advantage of that standard. So the way that Highfive works is if I happen to have Highfive in my conference room, and I wanted to talk to you, Martin, in Germany, what I could do is I could send you a link, and even if you don't have Highfive hardware, you could just join from your laptop or your mobile device by opening up that link. Click on that link and you'll be in a video call with us. And so the user experience is one that can support all of those types of scenarios because A, it's cloud-based, B, it's built on open standards, and so you'll be able to join calls directly from a set of web applications and native applications that we built that you'll be able to access from wherever you are.
What happens, imagine I'm buying one of those hardwares and install it in my company. And after maybe 12 months or so, there's some kind of issue with the hardware. Are you then responsible for the maintenance, or are you sending somebody who solved the problem, or is it me who should fix it or buy a new one?
No, we have warranties and guarantees for customers, so that they can buy Highfive, and if anything goes wrong with the devices that you have in your offices, we've got a support team that can take care of all of your issues. The interesting thing about Highfive is that, unlike previous generations of hardware companies, when you buy a piece of hardware, it doesn't really change after a couple of years. One of the interesting things about Highfive is that we're primarily a software company, but we are building a piece of hardware, and the nice thing about being a software company is that we've adopted all the best practices of how software companies work. So we have automatic updates. Every time we push out a new release, every single person who has Highfive or who has Highfive installed in their offices will get all of that new functionality. Mm-hmm. We push out releases very frequently, generally anywhere from every 2 to 6 weeks. And we've designed our hardware in a way that it can automatically be updated and take advantage of all the new functionality that we're releasing. And so your product will always get better. Mm-hmm. It'll automatically be improving over time. But if you do run into issues, you just work with us and we'll take care of it all.
Cool. How hard was it to design the hardware and find a supplier?
This was my first company where we built a piece of hardware. So this is my 4th startup company now. Mm-hmm. I did 3 other startup companies that were all building software, but this is the first time that I got involved in building a piece of hardware. And while, for anybody who's contemplating building hardware, Internet of Things is a pretty common theme these days. What I'll share with folks based on our learning is that while it's easier than it's ever been to build a hardware-based product, it's still hard. And it took us nearly 2 years to go from concept, when we had even a napkin sketch idea of what we were trying to build, to something that was fully production grade, ready to be manufactured. And it turns out all of the problems you have to solve along the way, they just take time. Anytime you discover an issue, it's a 6-week turnaround before you can build a new version of it. Mm. And so as a result, any mistakes you make along the way will get felt down the line because of the time required to iterate. And so there's a lot of learning that we had around being able to pull together and build a device, particularly one that was connected to the internet, particularly one that needed to be affordable, easy to use, and reflect the margins that we need to be able to operate a business. But we've been successful, and I think it creates a significant differentiator for us, and ultimately was the user experience that customers have needed.
Where do you perceive the market will go in terms of conferencing systems?
I think what you're seeing is that there's a general transition away from the way that conferencing systems worked before. Conferencing systems tended to be special purpose, big iron types of products that customers had to customize and deploy. So these are products from companies like Cisco, from companies like Polycom. When it comes to business communications, these are the companies that were building products, and for today's world, they just require too much customization, too much deployment cost, too much complexity to manage, and as a result, haven't been able to be deployed very broadly. So I'll give you, a statistic that we like to think about. There are over 50 million conference rooms in the world today, and only 1 million of them have been wired with video. Most of them have nothing but a TV screen and a speakerphone in them. And our bet is that every single one of those rooms will be wired with video. Well, Cisco and Polycom just don't have products that you can deploy at that kind of scale because they're too expensive, they're too hard to manage. Software tools aren't going to enable you to put video in all those conference rooms either. And so what we've found is that the market size is really enormous for a new generation of products. I think customers are craving tools to work better. People are frustrated and not happy with tools like WebEx and GoToMeeting, and they're looking for a new generation of tools to do better. And I think we're in that category. So where we see the world going is that our bet is that video and conferencing is going to continue to be a significantly growing market. People are more distributed. People are looking for new ways to connect. They have mobile phones and devices that they need to connect with their coworkers from wherever they are. They've got broadband connections everywhere. And the tools that exist today that people are using were all invented in a time before all those things were realities. And so I think what you're going to see over the next several years is a set of tools that emerge that are designed for today's world where we're connected from everywhere. They assume that we've got high bandwidth connections. They assume we've got smartphones in our pocket. And they're easy to use, they're lightweight, and you can just walk into a room, click a button, and be connected to the group of people that you're wanting to talk to.
Shan, it seems that currently you are only building intra-company communication networks. Are you also planning to do inter-company networks? Imagine you are going on LinkedIn, searching for some people, find some interesting people that you think are totally worthwhile talking to because you can either sell or buy something from them. And then you both check, okay, am I in the Highfive communication network? Yes, we are. Let's have a video chat and make a transaction online or virtual.
What we tend to find is that most people are looking for more ways to communicate, not less. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes what you really want to find is the right form of communication for the situation. So sometimes an email might make sense, sometimes an instant message might make sense, sometimes a text message might make sense, sometimes a phone call might make sense. What we find is that the way that we've developed Highfive is that people can talk to whomever they want. So for example, one of our customers, Cloudera, they are using Highfive for recruiting conversations. Mm-hmm. So, we want to recruit somebody into the company, and it's way better to do a video call than it is a phone screen. And so the way that Highfive works is that a recruiter can send a customized link for their candidate, and that candidate can join the conversation, and you get a much richer initial conversation when you're able to see them. And so what we've created allows people to communicate with people both inside their company and outside their company. But the thing that's most important about the way that we think about the world with Highfive is that we want to give people the option to use video in all those situations where email or a phone call doesn't quite make sense, and also it doesn't quite make sense to go travel and meet somebody in person. Recruiting and initial screens are a great example of that. Another great example of that is I might be working with a partner. I might be working with a design agency. I might be working with a marketing vendor. I might be working with a supplier. And we talk to each other every day, and we would be way more effective if we could just see each other. Highfive enables that because of the way that we've architected our system. We've maintained the security that you need for people inside your company, as well as giving you the ability to talk very easily with people outside your company.
Cool. Shan, how did you acquire the customers, and how hard was it, especially in the first 10 or 15 customers?
This is a pretty interesting story, actually. So we, before we had any product, we knew that it was going to take us a while to build our technology. And so what we did was we decided to go and start talking to customers right away. And what we found, and the reason we did that was to go learn about how big our market was and what value proposition we needed to be selling to our customers. The thing that we found was that the response was overwhelming. Everybody was looking for a solution. And so the way we found our customers, ironically, was before we had any product. The first version of our product, without exaggeration, was a PowerPoint slide or a PowerPoint deck that had a set of mock-ups of the product that we were intending to build. And what we would do is we would go and reach out to customers directly, oftentimes just knocking on their doors and asking them if they were interested in our product. And it turns out that that customers ended up being very, very interested. our first 15 customers essentially came from that effort, and they just waited for us to build our product because they knew that what we were building was what they wanted. And so the way we found our first 15 to 50 customers, in fact, was through this effort of reaching out and trying to look for customers before we actually had any product. And so the first version of our product was a pure mock-up of a set of capabilities that we were only imagining being built. And a couple of years later, we finally have all of that built, and I think that was a pretty good indication of how much interest we were getting from the market.
And are you currently only having a direct sales force, or are you using also distribution partners?
It's a very good question. It's a very hot topic for us right now internally. To date, we've largely been selling purely direct. We have a sales team that is handling all of our business today, but most of the interest that we're getting from customers is largely inbound, comes in over the website. We are exploring a number of different options for how we continue to distribute, and certainly distribution partners are one of the things that is potentially part of that equation.
And the direct sales is currently only focused on the US, or is it really like international?
Today we're primarily selling to the US, but most of the companies that we sell to have offices overseas. Yeah. And so what they're doing is they're buying Highfive, setting Highfive up across their offices around the world. We've been deployed in over 55 countries now, and people are regularly doing calls from all around the world.
Cool. Sean, you started like 4 companies. What advice can you give new entrepreneurs so they make less errors?
Well, that's a good question. So this is my third startup company, the third startup company that I've been a founder of, and I was an early engineer at my very first startup company. I would say, well, first of all, I think making errors is part of the process. By definition, I think if there's one thing that I've learned, by definition, what you are doing as a startup company is something that hasn't been done before. And so it's unreasonable to expect you to not make any mistakes. And so the way we think about the world, or the way I think about the world, is your goal is to make different mistakes and mistakes that you haven't made before, and ultimately keep learning through that process of making mistakes. I think the biggest ones that I think about, or the biggest lessons that I think about that I try to carry with us into Highfive, I think number one is focus on being fast. Focus on making decisions quickly, because it turns out the number of decisions that can truly sink your company or truly be disastrous is very, very, very small. It's non-zero, but the number of decisions that are truly either irreversible or something that you can't recover from tend to be very small. And so the faster you make decisions and the faster you go and try something ultimately makes the difference between whether you're going to succeed or not, because every time you make a decision and try something, you learn something new. One of the pieces of advice I give to folks when they're recruiting their initial teams is look for people that can execute. There's oftentimes this tendency to go and try to find the smartest person who's, great pedigree, and that can be very valuable, but if they can't execute, it turns out that, certainly in the early stages, and by early stages I mean the first several years, thinking about your strategy and thinking about sort of high-level challenges in your company are 5% of the problem. To give you sort of, kind of the best illustration of that, we came up with our product concept 3 years ago, and we're still working on it, and there haven't been material changes to what our core strategy is, and that's because we've been validated along the way. Now, we got lucky that, the ideas that we had turned out to be the ones that match pretty well with our market, but at the end of the day, what we needed were people that could execute, that can bring something to market, and have the mentality of solving problems and getting something over the finish line. So when you're recruiting people, one of the big pieces of advice that I give to folks is find people that can execute and get things over the finish line. I think the last thing, not the last, another big one that I'll highlight would be how you think about competition. oftentimes, so I'm also an angel investor now in a number of startup companies. And sometimes you talk to founders and there's a tendency to be really worried about what competition is doing. And one of my prior investors had a really great saying, you can't control what competitors are going to do. You can only control what you're going to do. So if you can keep your focus on customers, focus on solving the problems that they need, by definition, you are competing. Doing things as a reaction to what competitors do is always a bad formula, because you're not going to fail. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to fail because a competitor went off and did something. It's going to be because you didn't execute against an insight or an observation or something that you knew about your customers. So focus on your value proposition, focus on your product, find people that can get things over the finish line, and really think hard about what your value proposition is, and keep moving fast and making decisions and learning. Those are probably the biggest lessons I always take away. I have the saying kind of inside my team where, if you don't have data, then go and try to get it. And if you have no way to go get that data, then make a decision and go, because otherwise you're not going to learn. And I think that embodies a lot of those characteristics that I was describing.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, Jean.
Martin, thanks a lot for coming by. It was very nice to meet you.
It was a pleasure. And next time you are thinking about starting a company, focus on execution. Thank you so much. Great.
All right.
Awesome.